Located in Lee County, Auburn is the largest city in eastern Alabama. It's also Alabama's fastest-growing metropolitan area and the 19th fastest-growing metro area in the United States since 1990. Unofficially nicknamed the loveliest village on the plains, Auburn is a melting pot of cultures with its southern hospitality. This historic college town is the home of Auburn University, one of the most recognized public universities in the nation. Today's story involves a former student of this university, Lori Slasinski. Lori Ann Slasinski was born to parents Case and Arlene Slasinski on September 21, 1981. Gifted with blue eyes and blonde hair, Lori was always adored by her parents and her big brother, Paul. The family was originally from New York State, but later moved south to the rural Alabama farm country near the town of Auburn when Lori was just 13 years old. As a country girl being raised with animals, Lori was an avid animal lover. According to her friends, Lori was absolutely beautiful. She loved spending time with friends, watching movies, riding her bicycle, and playing video games. In addition to all that fun, she was also very studious, and her family tried to support her as much as they could. After finishing high school, Lori enrolled in nearby Auburn University, where she majored in psychology with a minor in criminology. Her parents bought her a mobile home so that she could live off campus in a manicured trailer park that was popular with students. She was living alone with her beloved dog, Peanut, a Yorkshire Terrier. Her close bond with her family remained intact, with her mother calling every day to check up on her. In 2005, she graduated with honors from Auburn University. Soon after graduation, she took up a job at the East Alabama Mental Health Center while still living in the trailer park. She also made plans to go for her master's degree in psychology in the near future. Lori's family was proud of her achievements, unaware of any foreshadowing of evil that was looming over her head. On June 10, 2006, 24-year-old Lori had made plans for a girls' night at her best friend Lindsey Braun's house. They had plans to have a few drinks and watch a movie. Lori first met Lindsey in their junior year at Auburn University. Already impressed by Lori's sweet, charming, and outgoing personality, the two girls became friends. The bond only grew stronger when they both got a job at the same mental health facility after completing graduation. Around 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, Lori called Lindsey saying that she had to stop at the store, and then she'd head over to her house for the movie night. Unfortunately, she would never make it there. Lindsey grew worried when she did not hear from Lori again that night or the following day. She called Lori several times and left messages on her home answering machine, but she never heard back from her. When Lori did not show up at her workplace on Monday, June 12th, Lindsey's concerns skyrocketed. It was very unusual for Lori to miss work and not inform anyone. After another no-show at work on the following Tuesday, the 13th, Lindsey, along with another coworker, went to Lori's house to check on her. When they reached the trailer home, Lindsey could not find Lori anywhere. Upon entering, she found the door unlocked and the AC on, which was pretty surprising. She also observed that Lori's dog, Peanut, was inside his crate. He looked well-nourished and happy, as if someone was taking care of him. Amazingly, his crate was unsoiled, even though Lori had been missing for several days at that point. Lindsey felt that something was amiss, as it was unlike Lori to leave her beloved pet alone unattended. Lindsey remembered that Lori had placed 3 rugs on the kitchen floor as the dog refused to walk on the tile. These rugs were missing, along with the outside trash can when Lindsey entered. Later that same day, June 13, 2006, Lori's mother Arlene got a call from her workplace regarding Lori missing work 2 days in a row. Arlene immediately tried to call her, but could not get a hold of her. Afraid for her daughter's well-being, Arlene immediately left for Auburn after alerting her husband Casey of their daughter's disappearance. Upon arrival, she entered Lori's trailer and found a disturbing scene. She noticed the door was slightly jarred and her bed was perfectly made, but there was no sign of Lori. Her car was also missing. With a closer look, she noticed Lori's kitchen rugs, a pillow from the couch, a Galileo thermometer, a green trash can that Lori put a rake and shovel in, and the phone cord for her landline were all gone. Alarm bells rang as Arlene instantly realized something was horribly wrong. She officially reported her daughter missing while still hoping that she would show up eventually. As the initial investigation was launched and police scanned through Lori's trailer home, they could not find any significant evidence that could link a possible suspect. However, they noticed there were obvious signs of a struggle and scuff marks on the wall. There was semen discovered on Lori's bedsheet, and traces of blood were also found on the doorknob. A coat hanger and a single golden hoop earring were also found at the scene. Police would soon recover surveillance footage from June 10, 2006, showing Lori stopping at an Alabama Walmart. That was the last known sighting of Lori, and nobody had any clue what happened to her after that. A tip would, however, soon come in later that afternoon. Arlene got a phone call from one of Lori's friends, 25-year-old Daryl Richard Ennis, who was commonly referred to as Rick. Rick told Arlene that he met Lori the day she went missing, and he thought she might have gone off to make a drug deal. Lori had met Rick Ennis at a bowling alley where he worked. She often hung out there when she was still a student. Arlene knew him because Lori invited him to spend Christmas with Lori's family in 2005. Lori felt bad for him having no family of his own. However, Arlene could not believe what Ennis was claiming, despite her daughter's close friendship with him. She did not believe that Lori would ever be involved in drug dealing. She thought that he was simply lying through his teeth, but didn't have any clue as to why. Police were also given this information by Ennis himself, yet before they could act on it, a terrifying discovery was made. On June 14, 2006, 4 days after Lori's disappearance, at approximately 4:40 a.m., her car was found fully ablaze on an impasse near the bowling alley where Rick had previously been employed. From that point on, the investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a possible homicide. According to investigators, the fire destroyed any traces of evidence that would have possibly been found inside the car. However, Lori was not inside the vehicle at the time it was burnt. A hand-rolled cigarette was on the ground near the car. A gas can was also found close by in the woods. The incident horrified Lori's family, and they were almost certain now that something very bad had happened to her. Investigating the information Ennis provided to Arlene was their only clue at the time. When Ennis was brought in for questioning, he repeated the same story he told Arlene, only adding more details this time. Ennis claimed that he and Lori grew marijuana together. According to him, Lori might have gone off to sell her share of the weed they grew together. He also added that Lori could have been dealing with shady people. Police raided Lori's trailer. However, even after a thorough search, the police were unable to find any evidence of Lori dealing drugs. During the interview, investigators also took notice of several scratches on Rick's hands and arms, which he claimed came from his dog. More concerning things came to light when investigators talked to Lindsay. As per Lindsay's account, she had heard Rick Ennis speaking in the background when she and Lori last spoke on the phone the day she vanished. Since Ennis was known to be a friend of Lori, Lindsay did not think much of it at the time. Lindsay claimed that when she texted Rick inquiring about Lori's whereabouts, he said that she was fine when he left her. Lindsay also informed the investigators that before her disappearance, Lori had told her that Rick had written a love letter to her. His feelings for her were not reciprocated. Lindsay also claimed that Lori told her that she was not romantically attracted to Rick and was going to have a conversation about it with him. Later, investigators found out that Ennis told his friends about his letter and Lori's rejection. When police re-interviewed him to confront him with the new information they collected from Lindsay, he admitted meeting her hours before her disappearance, but insisted that Lori was perfectly fine and was preparing to go to the store when he left her house. However, investigators discovered several inconsistencies in his statement. Investigators began focusing on Rick Ennis as their prime suspect. Their suspicion only grew stronger after searching his car. Investigators found several items of interest, including a knife, some cleaning supplies, and handcuffs. With this evidence, investigators began digging through his past, but they were not expecting the twists they were going to be met with. Looking through the unimaginably dark past of Rick Ennis, investigators discovered that he had actually murdered his mother and stepfather when he was only 12 years of age. On March 3, 1993, just 10 months after their marriage, Ennis had beaten his mother, who was known as a sweet church-going lady, to death with a baseball bat after shooting her in the face in their trailer in North Montgomery, Alabama, where they lived. Ennis' stepfather, Eddie Joe Flowers, who was known as Elvis because of his sideburns and vibrant personality, was met with the same fate as his wife. After murdering his mother, Rick shot him in the face using a shotgun when Eddie came home from work. After the murder, Ennis drove the family car and crashed into a fence on the side of the highway. Alabama State Trooper John Clark stopped Ennis walking along the highway. When he asked him where his parents were, Ennis told them that he'd killed them. As Detective Clark searched the backpack the young boy was carrying, he found a kitchen knife and some ammunition for a 12-gauge shotgun, as well as for a .22 caliber. When asked why he killed his parents, the emotionless 12-year-old Ennis told the cops that he was mad that his parents planned to move. He said he didn't want to leave the school. For 2 days, investigators believed he lived with their bodies while continuing to go to school. He further confessed about his future plans to kill his 3 stepsisters, which further shocked the investigators at the time. Although his murders were nothing short of gruesome, due to his age, he could not be tried as an adult. As a minor at the time, he was sent to jail for 9 years for the double murder. After he was released, he moved to Auburn, where he had then met Lori Slasinski. After Lori's disappearance, Rick Ennis was the prime suspect in the case. However, in spite of Ennis' past and loads of circumstantial evidence, it was impossible to charge Ennis for Lori's murder without Lori's body or any direct evidence. Ennis left Auburn just weeks after his interview with detectives and moved elsewhere, finally ending up in Huntsville, Alabama in 2007. By then, though, Lori's case had gone cold. After moving to Huntsville, he soon moved in with a roommate, Abram Sissons. Abram noticed that Ennis brought kitchen rugs with him, which he claimed were a gift from Lori. He also told Abram that he was in love with a woman in Auburn who disappeared without a trace, but did not mention her name. Abram found nothing unusual in these conversations until he learned about Ennis' dark past. He then asked Ennis to leave immediately. Abram later claimed that when he returned to his apartment, it was completely trashed. However, the police recovered the rugs, one of which tested positive for Ennis's blood. Abram also claimed later that he saw a Galileo thermometer in Ennis's room before he moved in with him, the same kind that was missing from Lori's home. Sadly, the police could still not link Ennis to Lori's murder at this time. As their prime suspect remained at large, the case remained unsolved while Lori's devastated family waited for answers. For years, this case had no updates. Then in 2016, after a decade, Mark Whitaker, a special agent of the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation, opened a cold case unit and started reinvestigating Lori's disappearance along with his team, which included his longtime partner, Agent J.W. Barnes. Lori's case was their first project, and they began revisiting the evidence, sending some of the items to forensic labs for testing, and conducting several interviews and re-interviews. After the re-examination of the evidence, Ennis naturally became his main suspect. Agent Mark was aware of Ennis' past, and his gut told him that Ennis had done something similar to Lori, but he had no idea as to how to prove his guilt without more evidence or a body. However, in an unexpected twist, Agent Whitaker's partner, Agent J.W. Barnes, found an important piece of evidence while looking through the files. He discovered a report in an envelope that had not been opened for 10 years. After Lori's disappearance in 2006, police collected evidence from the trailer, but no one followed up with it until the results came in. The results showed that semen found on Lori's bedsheet and blood on the interior side of the front door contained Rick Ennis' DNA. After organizing all the evidence, investigators built a strong case against Rick Ennis and were eventually able to get an indictment order in 2018. By this time, Ennis was newly engaged to a school librarian named Alana Atkinson and was living in Pilot, Virginia. There, he was working for a company that designed and built portable living structures called yurts. On August 6, 2018, on his 38th birthday, 12 years after Lori Slasinski went missing from Auburn, Rick Ennis was arrested by a task force of U.S. Marshals. While it came as a relief to Lori's family, Ennis' fiancée and co-workers were shocked by this turn of events. After being arrested on 2 counts of capital murder, His trial was postponed due to COVID-19. The trial finally began on April 1, 2022. While the prosecution presented all the evidence that suggested Ennis' involvement in the crime, including the cigarette butt and Lori's bedsheet containing his DNA, the defense argued that police could have taken the cigarette from Ennis' home and planted it at the crime scene. They also attacked Lori Slasinski's character by trying to portray her as a drug dealer. To explain how his DNA got on the bedsheet, Rick claimed that he had consensual sex with Lori before her disappearance, suggesting that they were still intimate despite Lori's rejection of his advances. However, his story did not seem very convincing, especially when two more witnesses came forward with jaw-dropping information. One of his former co-workers in Alabama, Jeremy Brooks, stated that on June 9, 2006, just one day prior to Lori's mysterious disappearance, he received a call from Ennis asking if he could bring him gas and if he could keep the gas can. Jeremy rejected his request. Later, after police found Lori's scorched car and a gas can, it matched the description of a gas can that was missing from the bowling alley where Ennis worked. Another of his former co-workers from South Carolina, Terry Booth, testified about the chilling experience he had with Ennis years prior. Terry remembered asking Ennis why he moved from Auburn. Ennis told him that he had to get rid of a body. Although he thought Ennis was just joking with him, the announcement of his arrest for Lori's murder proved otherwise. Although Rick Ennis continued to deny all allegations against him and maintained his innocence, jurors came up with a guilty verdict after 2 days of deliberation. He was facing the death penalty for the crime, but the DA agreed to take the death penalty off the table after consulting with Arlene. Arlene later said that she felt agreeing to a life without parole sentence for Rick Ennis would save her from years of potential appeal hearings, but would also ensure that Ennis would never be free. On April 14, 2022, he was sentenced to life without parole. He remains incarcerated in William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. For Arlene Slasinski, the outcome was bittersweet. With tears in her eyes, she shared that it meant she had to finally accept that Lori was never coming home, an incredible hope that a portion of her heart always clung to. Let us know in the comments section what your thoughts are on this tragic case. Do you think Rick Ennis will ever give up the location of Lori's remains? The Rodens were a large family from Ohio, United States. The patriarch, Christopher Roden, had been married to Dana Roden, with whom he had 3 children, Frankie, Hannah Mae, and Christopher Jr. By 2016, Christopher and Dana had separated, but lived on the same property located on Union Hill Road in the rural area of Pike in Ohio, which they owned. Christopher, a 40-year-old laborer, worked at the family's Big Bear Lake complex and lived in a trailer with his 38-year-old cousin, Gary. Dana, then 37, worked as a nursing assistant at a rehabilitation center and resided in a trailer 2 kilometers from her ex-husband with their younger children, who were then 19 and 16 years old. Hannah's 2-year-old daughter, Sophie, also spent most of her time with them. Later, Frankie, who was 20, moved with his fiancée to another nearby trailer. He had a 3-year-old son named Bentley from a previous relationship and a 6-month-old baby with his new partner, spending most of his time helping his father at the complex. The family was rounded out by Kenneth, Christopher's brother. Like the rest of his relatives, he was known for being hardworking, commuting daily to Columbus for work and living only 15 minutes away from the rest of his family. On April 18, 2016, the Roden family expanded with the arrival of Hannah's new daughter, whose father was unknown. Although it was speculated that the father could be Charlie, the brother of her sister-in-law, there was no certainty. Hannah had no interest in finding out, as she did not have a good relationship with Jake Wagner, Sophie's father. She preferred that the care of the new baby remained within the family as she worked as a nursing assistant and finished high school. The relationship within the Roden family was such that they even included Bobby Jo Manley, Dana's sister, in their lives. As she was unemployed, Christopher offered her work taking care of his animals, given the large size of his property. Bobby accepted, unaware that during one of those visits, she would encounter the most unimaginable scene possible. It was 7:53 a.m. on April 22, 2016, when Bobby entered the trailer as she did every day, quickly realizing the house was not empty. Inside, she found Christopher and Gary amidst a massive pool of blood. She immediately took out her cell phone and dialed emergency services, her voice breaking as she requested they come to 477 Union Hill Road. Then, as if on reflex, Bobby went to the homes of her other relatives, knocked on the door, but no one answered. Seconds later, little Bentley came out. Upon entering, Bobby was breathless at the sight. On the bed lay the lifeless bodies of Frank and his wife. Assaulted, alive but splattered with blood, was the 6-month-old baby. As the police were en route to the scene, another neighbor intercepted them, urging them to visit 2 other nearby locations, suspecting there would be more casualties. They were right. In the 3rd house, they found the bodies of Dana, Christopher Jr., and Hannah, also covered in blood. The only survivor from that home was the infant, just a few days old. By then, the news had spread like wildfire in the media. A cousin of the Rodens went to ensure Kenneth was safe. Sadly, he too had been shot. He called the police to report he had found the last body. By 1:26 p.m., all the victims had been accounted for. Christopher, Dana, Frankie, Hannah Roden, Christopher Jr., Hannah Hazel, the fiancé of Frankie, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were the young children whom the murderers had spared and little Sophie, who by chance was at her father Jake's house. Examining the bodies, investigators were able to reconstruct the crime. Christopher had a defensive wound on his right arm, leading to the conclusion that he was awake when the assailants entered his home. He confronted the attackers, but was overwhelmed by 9 gunshots. Gary was hit by 5 shots. Dana received the same number in her head and neck, some executed even after she had perished, indicating the attackers had been particularly brutal with her. Christopher Jr. was shot 4 times in the head while sleeping, as was Frankie. Hannah Hazel was also murdered with 2 shots to the skull. Kenneth was the only one with a single shot. All the victims had died from multiple gunshots fired from close range, precisely in the same body part. Detectives estimated the assailants fired a total of 32 times, clearly using a silencer, as no one in the area heard the noises. Moreover, all had their hands covered with plastic bags, and autopsy reports showed at least one of the victims had 9 significant wounds. It was clear this was a premeditated crime aimed at eradicating the entire clan, leaving unanswered who could have committed such a heinous act. Upon inspecting the scene, agents found 5 different types of bullet casings from Remington. However, they also found another unused bullet from a different model, confirming their suspicion that more than one attacker was involved in the crime. While the victim's blood was present in all the trailers, none of it matched the DNA of the perpetrators. Detectives attempted to review security camera footage from the homes, but the cameras had been disconnected. These devices also lacked DNA, clearly indicating that the planners of the crime had meticulously covered their tracks. Just as they were running out of hope, the officers found something. In 3 of the 4 homes, there were marijuana grow operations, and one of them contained more than 200 plants. They quickly theorized that the Rodens were involved in drug trafficking, a common occurrence in Ohio, and speculated that the motive for the crime might have been a drug-related dispute. They investigated whether the family had connections to cartels or drug traffickers, but found nothing. The possibility of a family dispute over drug money was also considered but led nowhere. Additionally, they found cockfighting rings in one of the trailers. However, illegal cockfighting did not seem to be the motive behind the incident. They were about to leave without discovering anything when a key testimony emerged. Dana's father told detectives that the killers had to be known to the family, as otherwise, the dogs would have attacked them. This combined with the lack of forced entry signs at any of the homes narrowed the lines of investigation. Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine stated it was a cold-blooded crime and that the killers were still at large and armed. Efforts were made to locate the rest of the Rodens' relatives to ensure their safety. 20 investigators combed through the state searching every road and home and interrogated every acquaintance of the family in an attempt to uncover what happened. This only caused a wave of panic in Pike County. Such was the uncertainty that a businessman named Jeff Ruby offered a reward of $25,000 for any tip that could help the police. Neighbors hung a sign on Christopher's barn door asking, Do you know who killed us on April 22, 2016? In January 2017, the investigation yielded its first result, though it was only a side effect. A cousin of the Rodens named Josh was arrested for substance trafficking. However, the police had already determined that the amount of marijuana grown by the Rodens was not significant enough to suggest a cartel attack. Months passed, and the agents could not even find a motive after interviewing 550 people, gathering 1,100 tips, and examining 700 pieces of evidence. On April 13, 2017, the authorities had to break the hard news, announcing in the media that they did not have sufficient evidence to make any arrests. However, the police assured that they had some leads, which they could not yet make public. Days later, on the first anniversary of the incident, a mass and a small tribute were organized, attended by various authorities. The Pike Massacre remained a topic of discussion for everyone. But by the time 2 years had passed, only the neighbors continued to show interest in the case. Not even the local press, the sheriff, or the prosecutor attended the second memorial service. It seemed the county's largest criminal investigation would be forgotten. That changed in June when an important announcement was made. The prosecutor's words proved true as he publicly stated for the first time that they were focusing on the Wagners, the family of Hannah's ex-partner. The individuals named were George, his wife Angela, both 47, and their 2 sons, George, 27, and Edward, 26, known as Jake. All lived in Peebles, 25 kilometers from where the crime occurred. By then, the Wagners had moved to Kenai, a small town in Alaska, taking with them little Sophie, who ended up in her father's custody after Hannah's death. Their reason for leaving the state was claimed to be their deep affection for the Rodens and the immense pain their deaths caused them. The prosecutor requested any information about the Wagners from the public. But it wasn't long before they returned. Running out of money, they had to move back to Ohio. As preparations for their arrest were underway, agents uncovered how the relationship between the 2 families ended in bloodshed. Jake Wagner met Hannah Roden in high school when he was 18 and she was just 13. They went to prom together and became inseparable, which also brought the 2 families closer, sharing gatherings and celebrations. When Hannah was 15, she became pregnant with Jake's child. Shortly after Sophie's birth, Jake asked her to move in with him and his family, believing it would provide a healthier environment for the child. Hannah refused, feeling this was an attempt to control her. From then on, everything went downhill, with both wanting full custody of the girl and each family fighting for their own interests. On one occasion, Jake proposed that Hannah sign a document to share custody with him and his brother. Seeing Hannah's refusal, Jake began to threaten her, texting that he would take Sophie by force if necessary, and trying to manipulate her by saying that if she truly loved her daughter, she would know she needed to live with him. According to these messages, Jake believed the Rodens could harm the little girl. These conversations continued for 2 years, with Hannah refusing to live with the Wagners. In March 2015, she decided to end the relationship with Jake, citing his abusiveness. In one of her messages, she made it clear that he had hurt her and that she was tired of being pursued by him. These violent practices were common in the Wagner family, as George had managed to gain full custody of his son by threatening the child's mother with weapons. Things worsened when Hannah announced she was expecting a second daughter. Although she denied Jake was the father, he was not entirely convinced given their resumed relationship. Far from respecting his ex-partner's wishes, he initiated a new dispute over paternity. In December 2015, Angela Wagner hacked into Hannah's social media accounts and discovered a message on Facebook that completely enraged the family. In it, Hannah told George's ex-wife that her ex-partner's family would have to kill her before she would give them custody of her daughter. A week before the incident, the Wagners made one last attempt to convince Hannah to give Jake full custody of Sophie. Hannah refused again, and then Jake's maternal grandmother falsified a document to make this happen. During the legal process, George's father and Christopher had a heated argument about where their granddaughter would live, completely severing the relationship between the 2 families. It was then that the Wagners began planning the crime. In Christmas 2015, they held a vote to decide whether to kill the Roden family to gain custody of Sophie. They all agreed. For 8 months, they meticulously planned the massacre, studying the rodents' routines, their schedules, sleep patterns, and the layout of their homes, as well as investigating their security systems. They even went to the rodents' property to fire guns into the air to check if the noise of the shots would carry too far. Noticing the sound would give them away, George's father decided it was best to purchase parts to make homemade silencers. Angela bought athletic shoes for her husband and sons to wear on the day of the crime and to destroy afterward. She also acquired phone jammers to secretly install on the victims' devices to prevent them from calling for help. George's father arranged for a van to be used that night without being recognized. On the night of the crime, Angela stayed home with Sophie, as it was their turn for shared custody, providing a perfect alibi. George's father went to Christopher's house to lure him into a supposed drug deal. Christopher agreed and opened his door, unaware of what would follow. Authorities found evidence that Angela had purchased the athletic shoes weeks before the murder, matching a blood-stained footprint found on the floor of one of the trailers. They also confirmed she had hacked her ex-daughter-in-law's account. Inspecting the Wagners' electronic devices, agents found internet searches on parental custody, indicating a clear obsession with controlling the children. However, there also appeared to be a conflict between the two families over $3,000 for the purchase of a car. Although Angela was evidently the mastermind behind the plan, the agents were certain that Jake led the executions and that all members of the Wagner clan participated. On November 13, 2018, authorities announced the arrest of 6 individuals, the first 4 being George's father, Angela, George's son, and Jake. They were indicted by the Pike County Grand Jury on 22 counts, including 8 charges of aggravated murder, and pleaded not guilty to all charges. Jake was also charged with a sexual offense for engaging in sexual conduct with Hannah when she was 15 and he was 20. On the same day, 2 additional individuals were arrested. Though they had not participated in the murders, they were accused of perjury and obstructing justice. These were Angela's mother, Rita, 65, and George's mother, Frederica, 76. The charges against Frederica included lying about purchasing bulletproof vests for her son. Neither was sent to prison, but Frederica was monitored electronically with a GPS device. Furthermore, authorities disclosed the motive behind the crime: the custody battle over Sophie. After years of uncertainty, the trial was all that remained. In June 2019, it was proven through receipts that Frederica had purchased the bulletproof vests after the incident, leading to the withdrawal of charges against her. Rita was not as fortunate. That same year, a handwriting analysis determined she was guilty of falsifying a document for Sophie's custody. In December, she began cooperating with the prosecution to avoid prison. The rest of the Wagners remained in jail, refusing to cooperate with the case and expressing sorrow over the rodents' deaths, wishing for the real killers to be imprisoned. It seemed the case would never close and Ohio residents could never rest easy until something unexpected happened 2 years later. On April 22, 2021, the 5th anniversary of the massacre, Jake reached a plea deal with prosecutors on the condition that his family members would not face the death penalty, but instead receive life sentences. He confessed to personally murdering 5 of the 8 victims and pleaded guilty to 23 criminal charges, including 8 for aggravated murder and others for conspiracy, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. He testified that he felt compelled to kill Hannah to gain custody of his daughter and had to do the same to the rest of the rodents, knowing they would seek revenge otherwise. He expressed deep remorse and was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Following the trial, he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution in the cases against his parents and brother. Thanks to his cooperation, authorities found the van George's father had purchased for the crime and 3 firearms the family had attempted to cut up and incinerate. These were buried in buckets of cement and hidden behind the Wagner residence's barn. A specialist managed to reconstruct the fragments to prove that the casings matched those found at the rodents' trailers. On September 10th of that year, Angela Wagner pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, burglary, and tampering with evidence, agreeing to testify against the remaining accused individuals. In exchange, prosecutors dropped the aggravated murder charges against her, and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Only those who continue to deny their involvement remain to be judged. The trial against George Wagner's son began on August 28, 2022. The prosecutor called the defendant's ex-partner to testify, who had distanced herself from the family fearing for her life. The prosecution argued that George was complicit in planning, executing, and covering up the murders. However, the young man denied having any knowledge of the crimes before, during, or after their commission, even stating that if his family had asked him to participate in such an act, he would have never agreed. After 3 months, he was found guilty of all 22 charges, including the 8 charges of aggravated murder, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In addition to a consecutive sentence of 121 years for firearm possession, George's father was still awaiting his trial, which would not occur until February 2024. If found guilty of the same 22 charges as his son, he would face a similar fate. Despite the entire family being convicted, he continues to claim his innocence. The surviving children were placed in the care of distant relatives. Out of respect for their privacy, their whereabouts cannot be disclosed, but it is known that they are happy and safe. When asked about his father, Bentley says he is fixing cars in heaven with Jesus. The Wagners' goal was to gain custody of Sophie, claiming they would take better care of her, but in reality, they deprived her of her own mother, uncles, and grandparents. The hope is that she grows up far from her father's family, in an environment where violence is never a means to an end. The name of Velma Barfield forever changed the narrative of crime and punishment in the United States. Her life story reads like a tragedy that challenges our perception of evil. Known to many as the Death Row Grandma, she became the first woman executed by lethal injection in the United States, the first woman to be executed after the death penalty's reinstatement in 1976, and also the first woman executed since 1962. But how did a wife, mother, and grandmother, once cherished and loved by those who knew her, transform into one of the most notorious figures in criminal history? Born in a time of economic despair, in the shadow of the Great Depression, Velma Margie Barfield came into the world on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, but was raised near Fayetteville. The second of 9 children, she witnessed a constant battle against poverty from an early age. In rural North Carolina, where life was governed by the rising and setting of the sun, Velma's family toiled on their small tobacco and cotton farm. Velma's father, Murphy Bullard, was a man worn down by the hardships of farm life. His temper was as volatile as the weather that dictated their fortunes. Velma claimed he was physically and sexually abusive to her and her sisters. However, other relatives disputed this. Velma's mother, Lily Bullard, bore the brunt of her husband's frustrations. In their world, love was a luxury they could hardly afford, leaving Velma and her siblings to navigate a childhood marked by emotional absence and the ever-present threat of violence. At a young age, Velma observed the financial differences between herself and her peers. That's when her first criminal activity started. She initially took small amounts of cash from her father to buy little things that she saw her classmates enjoying. Her petty thefts escalated to taking $80 from an elderly neighbor. When her father discovered that, he beat her severely, and Velma stopped stealing for the remainder of her childhood. Raised in a Christian household, young Velma found solace in the pages of her Bible, clinging to faith in the turmoil of her home life. This early introduction to religion was a constant amidst chaos. Yet, as she transitioned to adolescence, the psychological scars left by her upbringing would shape the woman she would later become. The world around was convulsed by World War II. The war, though distant, exacerbated the hardships faced by her family and deepened the fractures within. Velma, like many of her generation, was forced to grow up quickly. Her dreams and aspirations were often overshadowed by the pressing needs of survival and duty to family. Yet it was during this time that her resilience and tenacity began to shine through, qualities that would define her in both commendable and tragic ways. As Velma stepped into early adulthood, her desire for a life beyond the confines of her home grew stronger. She dreamed of escape. At the age of 17, she dropped out of school. The The search for love and stability led Velma into the arms of Thomas Burke, a union that promised freedom, but instead brought new hardships. By 19, she had 2 children, a son, Ron, and a daughter, Kim. The family lived happily in Parkton, North Carolina for over 15 years. Velma's life with Thomas seemed a hard-earned escape from the poverty and violence of her childhood. Everything changed in 1965 when Thomas got into a serious car crash and suffered head injuries. To cope with the intense pain and headaches caused by his injuries, he became a heavy drinker and drug user. His struggle with alcohol mirrored the demons of Velma's father, reigniting the traumas of her past. The cycle of abuse and neglect she vowed never to repeat began to encroach upon her own family. It was during these turbulent years that Velma's resilience was put to the ultimate test. The pressures of an unhappy marriage, the responsibilities of motherhood, and the patterns of her past weighed heavily on her soul. Velma started a job at a textile factory but soon had to quit due to health problems. She underwent an urgent hysterectomy, which left her feeling insecure about her femininity. After the surgery, she suffered from debilitating back pain and turned to prescription drugs. What began as a means to cope soon spiraled into an addiction that eroded her judgment and set the stage for the tragedies to come. Her journey was not a plunge, but a gradual descent, each step marked by an increasing desperation to maintain the illusion of control. On April 4, 1969, Velma had a fierce argument with her husband. Later that day, when she and the children were away, the house caught fire. Thomas, who remained inside, died from smoke inhalation, and the house was burned to the ground. Velma and the kids moved in with her parents. A few months after her husband's death, Velma started dating a widower, Jennings Barfield. They married in August 1970. One day, the couple had an argument, after which Jennings became mysteriously ill. On March 21, 1971, he died of a heart attack. Velma moved into her parents' home again. Soon after that, her father died of lung cancer. In the summer of 1974, her mother suffered severe stomach pain and was taken to the hospital. As she got better, she returned home. In August 1974, a man Velma was dating died in a car accident. On December 30th of the same year, her mother was taken to the hospital again with similar symptoms of a severe stomach illness. Doctors couldn't help her this time, nor could they diagnose her illness, and she died after 2 hours. No autopsy was performed. As mysterious deaths around Velma continued, her son Ronnie Burke said, "It's the saddest thing, but it seems like everybody my mother ever gets close to dies. How could the good Lord allow this to happen to a faithful Christian like Velma Barfield?" The financial strain of her addiction led to another unethical decision, forging checks to sustain her growing needs. But deceit has its price, and the trust within the community began to fray. Velma found herself trapped in a web of her own making. In 1975, she was convicted of 7 counts of writing bad checks and sentenced to 6 months in prison. However, she was released after serving 3 months. Upon her release in 1976, Velma took a job as a caretaker for the elderly. Initially, she worked for 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife, Dolly, in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery fell ill and died on January 29, 1977. A few weeks later, in February, Dolly developed symptoms of a stomach illness similar to those of Velma's mother and died on March 1st. Velma then started looking after 76-year-old Record Lee, who had broken her leg. On June 4, 1977, Lee's husband, John Henry, began to suffer severe pains in his stomach and chest. Doctors diagnosed his condition as a severe stomach virus. He died later that month. Later, in 1977, Velma moved in with her boyfriend, Roland Stewart Taylor, a relative of Dolly Edwards. He was a widower and tobacco farmer. One day, they were attending a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County. Suddenly, Stewart complained of severe stomach pain. He was taken to the hospital where he died after a few days. The search for truth begins in the quietest of ways. A question, a doubt, a pressing need for answers. Suspicion grew in the hearts of those who had watched Stuart's health decline under mysterious circumstances. It was their persistence that first brought the authorities to Velma's doorstep, initiating a chain of events that would lead to shocking revelations. An autopsy was ordered. The investigation into Stuart Taylor's death was methodical. Each test, each interview, each piece of evidence added another layer of suspicion around Velma. In the world of criminal investigations, breakthroughs often come with a faint clue, a moment of intuition, a connection previously unseen. For the team pursuing justice for Stuart Taylor and the other victims, it came in the form of forensic evidence. Arsenic became the linchpin in unraveling the mystery, traces of which were found in Stuart's system. Before the autopsy results were declared, Lumberton police received an anonymous phone call, reportedly from Velma's sister, who said that Velma had poisoned Taylor and others. Subsequently, Velma was arrested on charges of murdering Stuart Taylor. After her arrest, the body of Jennings Barfield was exhumed, and traces of arsenic were found. The unraveling of Velma's carefully constructed lies began. The art of interrogation is delicate, a push and pull between investigator and suspect, each question a probe into the darkest corners of the human heart. For Velma, the questions posed by her interrogators mirrored the ones she had long avoided within herself. It was in this room, under the weight of evidence and the scrutiny of the law, that the wall she had built to separate her actions from her conscience could no longer hold as the truth clawed its way to the surface. In search of solace, Velma turned to a spiritual advisor. It was in this desperate hope for redemption that she found the strength to confront her past. For her, the path to confession was a journey back to her soul. With a voice tinged with regret, Velma began to speak. A torrent of truths long dammed by fear, shame, and denial flowed forth. Her confession became a source of deep, lasting pain for her own family, who were unwittingly caught in her web of deceit. The woman they loved and the horrible crimes she committed were now inseparably linked, challenging their notions of forgiveness and the very foundations of their understanding of right and wrong. She confessed to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry Lee, her mother, Lillian, and her boyfriend, Stuart Taylor. Despite the fact that arsenic was found in Jennings Barfield's body, Velma denied killing him. The motive for the murders was stealing money from her victims to support her clandestine addiction to prescription drugs. She had also taken out a loan in her mother's name. Each of her tragic choices, made under the influence of pain, had a devastating impact on her destiny and the people around her. Faced with the threat of exposure, Velma took a step that irrevocably altered the course of her life. The path from one crime to another can often be a slippery slope. She found herself repeating the unthinkable. Every time, Velma went to her victims' funerals and seemed to sincerely mourn their loss. The burden of her secret pushed her further into isolation. Yet the resilient human psyche, adept at self-preservation, often takes refuge in justification to shield itself from the unbearable truth and finds ways to rationalize even the darkest deeds. Every time Velma stole money from her victims, then poisoned them as they got suspicious. To the outside world, she remained a devout churchgoer, a seemingly caring nurse, and a loving family member. But her moral compass, once guided by faith, now veered into a realm of denial, caught in a constant struggle between the remnants of her conscience and the overwhelming desire to escape the consequences of her actions. She was forging checks on her boyfriend Stuart Taylor's account. Presumably, he discovered that. So she mixed an arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea, determined to maintain her secret at any cost. At the trial, Velma's defense pleaded insanity, but this was not accepted. She appeared cold and uncaring. She laughed at the prosecutor and even gave the district attorney a round of applause after his closing speech. The prosecution painted a picture of Velma not as the church-going grandmother she purported to be, but as a calculating murderer driven by darkness. She was the architect of her own fate, and her actions deserved the utmost penalty. The defense, in turn, sought to humanize her, portraying her not as a monster, but as a troubled soul ensnared by addiction, abuse, and circumstances beyond her control, highlighting her mental health struggles as a mitigating factor in her crimes. In the world of law and order, the truth is often more complex than it appears, inseparable from human emotions. Although she eventually confessed to 6 murders, she was convicted only of the first-degree murder of Stuart Taylor in December 1978. The trial jury found aggravating circumstances and sentenced her to death. For the victims' families, the verdict was an acknowledgement of their irreplaceable loss. A designated holding area for female death row prisoners did not exist at the time, and Velma was the only female death row inmate in North Carolina. So she was imprisoned at Central Prison in Raleigh in an area for escape-prone prisoners and prisoners with mental illnesses. Subsequently, a unit for female death row inmates was established at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma was off the drugs and expressed remorse for the years that the pills had blurred her judgment and destroyed her moral compass. In the solitude of her cell, she began the arduous process of confronting her past. The nights were long, the faces of her victims haunted her dreams, and the silence served as a backdrop for her thoughts and regrets. It was during these moments of reflection that Velma faced the full magnitude of her actions, the lives she had taken, and the pain she had caused. Her conversations with the prison chaplain were not just about seeking forgiveness from a higher power, but about understanding the nature of atonement and the painstaking process of forgiving oneself. In jail, Velma confessed that she had never been a true Christian. Her Christianity had been a matter of form and gesture. Then, finally, while waiting for her trial, she genuinely opened her heart to Jesus and received forgiveness and salvation. She wrote in her autobiography, "All my life, I was weighted down by my sins because I couldn't do better. It never occurred to me that Jesus really did pay the price, that Jesus alone bore the extreme punishment, death, for my sins, not just for my good neighbors, and even more glorious, Jesus is willing to be my friend even now. I can talk to him and he will listen." She became a devout Christian and spent her 6 final years ministering to other inmates. Velma, in her own way, became a source of support to them. Her involvement in spiritual activities offered her a sense of community and belonging that had eluded her for much of her life. Her extensive participation in the Christian community led to a campaign to have her sentence commuted from death to life imprisonment. She wrote letters to Governor Jim Hunt telling him that her born-again Christian faith should be considered as a mitigating factor. She received support from many Christians across the United States, including evangelists Billy and Ruth Graham. Ruth kept in touch with Velma by mail. Her victims' families considered Velma's conversion a fraud and a ploy to save her life. To them, she was a woman who had killed their loved ones. Velma remained a loving mother and a caring grandmother. She enjoyed family visits every weekend and spent time with her children and grandchildren. Her new attorney, Richard Burr, said about her, "There was no hidden agenda with Velma. Whenever you were with her, she was who she was. From what I understand, that's how she lived her life in prison. So from the very beginning, I believed that when she committed those crimes, it was not the Velma Barfield mentally and emotionally that I was seeing and getting to know." Burr believed that Velma's pre-trial evaluations were inadequate, so he turned to psychiatrist Selwyn Rose. Dr. Rose evaluated Velma in 1980 and testified in the state court. He said that she suffered from 3 disorders, a multiple prescription drug abuse disorder, an underlying personality disorder, and depression. However, Dr. Rose never felt as if he had put together a complete picture of Velma. As Burr had no license to practice in North Carolina, he now assisted Velma's new lawyer, Jimmy Little. As time was running out, Velma's son, Ronnie Burke, asked her if she had killed his father. She replied, "I'm sure I probably did." She couldn't remember clearly, but she believed that she had left a cigarette or a match in the bed and then closed the door, leaving her drunk husband to sleep in their burning house. She also admitted to the pastor who helped her right woman on death row that she had murdered Jennings Barfield. Velma said she was glad that this was finally over because she was afraid that she was going to poison her grandchildren. She didn't know why she did it, but she did it, and it was not something she could stop. North Carolina's governor refused Velma's request for clemency and said that her victims had been literally tortured to death. Additionally, an appeal was made based on testimony from a psychiatry professor who asserted that she suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Professor Dorothy Lewis, professor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine and an expert in violent behavior, picked up patterns of manic episodes in Velma's earlier life associated with the development of a manic depressive disorder. She said she had talked to Velma's other personality, Billy, who told her Velma had been a victim of sexual abuse and that he, Billy, had killed her abusers. The judge responded to this by saying one of them did it. I don't care which one. Velma's final appeal was filed on October 30th, 1984 in the North Carolina Supreme Court based on her being incompetent at her original trial due to her drug addiction. This appeal was denied in federal court. She told her attorney, Jimmy Little, to drop all appeals the day before she was executed, explaining that she wanted to die with as much dignity as the state of North Carolina will allow. Her last hours were spent in reflection and prayer, seeking comfort in her faith. As she was preparing for death, the famous pastor, Billy Graham, told her over the phone, Velma, in a way I envy you because you're going to get to heaven before I do. Velma was executed on November 2nd, 1984 at Central Prison in Raleigh. She released a statement before her execution. I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years. I want to thank my family for standing with me through all this and my attorneys and all the support to me, everybody, the people with the prison department. I appreciate everything, their kindness and everything that they have shown me during these 6 years. As her last meal, she chose a bag of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. She received final visits from her family members and friends. She wasn't scared and told one of them, "When I go into that gas chamber at 2 a.m., it's my gateway to heaven." She was wearing pink pajamas for the execution. A stethoscope and heart monitor were taped to her chest. The wheeled gurney was brought to her cell, and she was fastened to it with straps across her body and legs. Then she was wheeled into the execution chamber shortly before 2 a.m. Crowds of pro- and anti-death penalty demonstrators gathered outside the prison. Some of the protesters accused Governor Hunt of refusing to show mercy and compassion, arguing that she could lead a life of value behind bars and help other prisoners. Richard Burr said, "Politics and death have been mixed up in this case." Inmates were banging rhythmically on the windows of their cells, waiting for the execution. About 80 people who were in favor of capital punishment cheered and applauded. The execution was carried out by 3 volunteers. One of the intravenous lines was a dummy so that none of the volunteers knew which of them actually administered the lethal dose. Velma was declared dead at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes after being administered the injection of pancuronium bromide. Observers at the execution reported that she passed away peacefully, with no apparent suffering or pain. About 300 opponents of the death penalty stood in silent vigil, carrying candles that were extinguished as the moment of the execution passed. At 2:25 a.m., Velma's body was taken to a medical school by an ambulance. She had requested that her organs be used for transplantation. She was buried in a small North Carolina cemetery near her first husband, Thomas Burke. She was 52 years old. Singer-songwriter Jonathan Byrd, the grandson of Jennings Barfield and his first wife, wrote a song about Velma. The story of Alison Bonilla. On September 27, 2020, police and several neighbors from the Florencio del Castillo community were attempting to locate a young woman named Alison Bonilla, who had been missing for more than 5 months. They headed to an illegal dump located in San Geronimo de Caquia in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. The first thing they spotted was a sock and a shoe, inside of which was a nail. Yandra, Alison's mother, instantly identified the clothing and even recognized the nail. Due to the nail polish color that had been applied at her nail salon, they're failing to find any more remains of the young woman. The search party withdrew, disheartened, but not defeated. The next day, they returned to the area and ventured down to a nearby coffee plantation located 93 meters deep into the illegal dumping ground. What they found left them completely stunned. Buried beneath the soil, moss and weeds were skeletal remains of the young woman, including vertebrae, ribs, parts of her upper limbs, pelvic bones, and a femur connected by cartilage. 8 meters from that site, they discovered a piece of fabric belonging to the pants Alison was wearing the day she disappeared. A little further away, they found a second shoe and part of an arm. It appeared that the mysterious neighbor who had provided this information had not lied. The event had been as horrific as he had described. But how did all this happen? Alison Pamela Bomia Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001 in the city of Cartago, Costa Rica. When she was very young, her parents divorced and she went to live with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. They moved to the Florencio del Castillo community in the town of Harris. Despite her family's modest economic standing, Alison never lacked for anything. Growing up in a nurturing environment led her to become a highly sociable, friendly, and attentive young woman. Everyone who knew her adored her. She had an especially close relationship with her mother. They were like friends. Alison would even sometimes help her mother at her nail salon. At 18 years old, Alison led a quiet life. She attended night classes at a school which was several kilometers away from her home. In her town, it was common for young people to attend schools far from their communities. So walking through the streets was a routine part of her day. She spent most of her time with her boyfriend, Harold Sigra. Her days typically consisted of going from school to her boyfriend's house or meeting up with friends and family. However, this routine was shattered on March 4, 2020. At 5 p.m., Alison left her home wearing blue jeans, a white and mustard-colored blouse, and light-colored sneakers. She took a collective bus to go to the school and traveled the 5.5 kilometers to the institution with a friend. She arrived around 6 p.m. Only she said goodbye to her friend and decided to visit her aunt who lived nearby. She arrived at her aunt's house, but no one was home. She then went to her boyfriend's house where she met his mother and they chatted for a while. Eventually, Harold arrived and they spent the rest of the afternoon together until he had to leave for an errand. Seeing that it was getting dark, Alison thought it would be best to leave as soon as possible and did not wait for her boyfriend to return to say goodbye. At 8 o'clock, Alison walked to the bus stop that would take her home to Florencio del Castillo. 10 minutes after boarding the bus, she received a text message from Harold, who was extremely worried. He told her it would have been better if she had waited for him to accompany her home. 40 minutes later, Alison got off at the bus stop closest to her home, but she still had a long distance to walk. The street was deserted, and the only light came from a few streetlights. Feeling somewhat anxious, Alison began the 1.6-kilometer walk to her home. She sent a message to her mother, Yandra, asking her to meet at a bridge 500 meters away from their house as they usually did. While walking, Alison noticed two men who appeared suspicious. They were heading in the same direction as her, so she quickened her pace and texted Harold, saying, "I was on the bus and just got off, and these two sketchy guys got off as well and are walking behind me. I'm gonna speed up because I'm scared." Concerned, Harold advised her to take a taxi and promised to pay for it, but Alison declined. She texted him that she was close to the bridge where she was supposed to meet her mother. The men began to walk faster as if trying to catch up with her. When Yendri arrived at the meeting point, there was no sign of Alison. She repeatedly called her daughter's phone, but got no answer. Distraught, Yendri returned home, hoping that Alison might have taken an alternate route, and had already arrived. Upon reaching home, she found it empty. The last time Alison had been online was at 8:40 p.m. Yendri tried to contact her again, but the messages went unanswered. The next day, she officially reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. The authorities began searching for clues to Alison's whereabouts. The first lead was security footage from a camera near the bridge where Alison was supposed to meet her mother. The tape showed her walking down the street toward her home, 8:47 p.m., at some point quickening her pace before disappearing into the darkness. There were no further traces of her after that. The following day, the Judicial Investigation Organization and the Ministry of Public Security joined the search. They examined various places close to the locality, including a lake and a nearby hydroelectric dam. The case drew the attention of the community, who decided to assist the authorities in the search. While investigating the streets near Alison's home, they discovered an object that caught their attention, a pair of plasters lying on the ground. This development was strange because the police had already searched the same area on the first day and found no trace of Alison. Someone seemed to be attempting to mislead them. On March 11th, a local resident came to the police station to share something suspicious he had seen on the day of Allison's disappearance. Around 8:30 p.m., the neighbor observed Allison walking briskly down the street near the bridge. A wine-colored BMW was parked nearby and started to fall over, gradually increasing its speed before stopping in front of her. Allison spoke for a few seconds with the person inside the car and then got in. The car then sped away at high speed. Upon hearing the neighbor's account, the police took immediate action to locate the vehicle. They searched all the houses near Allison's residence. On March 25th, they found the car in one of these homes. On March 29th, the Judicial Investigation Organization announced that they had seized the car for DNA testing. They also revealed that an investigation was underway against the car's owner, a man named Nelson Sanchez Urania. The 28-year-old man was known in the neighborhood for being extremely reclusive. He hardly spoke to anyone, and when he did, he was not friendly. Locals said he came from a somewhat strange family about which not much was known. One even speculated that he was involved with regional gangs. While the police continued to gather evidence to warrant the arrest of Sanchez Urania, now the prime suspect in Allison's disappearance, another significant event occurred. On April 4th, an employee of a store near the area found Allison's identification card. This was the second item belonging to Allison that had mysteriously appeared. The search continued, with authorities believing they were getting closer to discovering Allison's whereabouts. On April 17th, the police confirmed that they have found significant clues related to Allison's disappearance in the seized car, although they did not disclose any further details. On May 1st, the Costa Rican Red Cross joined the search efforts for Allison. Despite more people joining the search team, her body still remained missing. In the following months, the police focused on investigating the prime suspect and gathering enough evidence to charge him. Finally, on September 2nd, the Judicial Investigation Organization ordered the arrest of Sanchez Urania. He was formally arrested at same day without resistance. 24 hours later, authorities revealed that they had found traces of blood in the trunk, the car that had been seized over 5 months ago. These traces were matched with DNA samples from Allison Boney and Stanley. The results confirmed that there was no doubt that Sanchez Urania had attacked the young woman inside his car. Realizing that there was no turning back, Sanchez Urania decided it was time to confess his crime. He requested a meeting with his lawyer to reconstruct the events for the police. On March 4th, 2020, Sanchez Urania was driving his car when he saw Allison walking quickly down the street. He offered her a ride home, claiming it was late and that 2 nearby strangers looked suspicious. Trusting him, Allison got into the car, but once inside, Sanchez Urania attacked her and forced her into the trunk of the vehicle. He then took her to a coffee plantation. Once there, he forced her out of the car and took her about 140 meters from the entrance of the property. Where no one could hear them, after reaching the secluded spot, he struck her, causing an injury that left her unconscious. Blood splattered on the ground as he proceeded to assault her. After completing the horrific act, he walked back to where he had left his car, put Allison's body in the front seat, and tied her hands with a piece of cloth and adhesive tape. He then placed her back in the trunk of the car. Next, Sanchez Urania drove to an illegal dumping ground and took Allison, who was still unconscious, out of the trunk. Without hesitation, he threw the body into a coffee plantation approximately 450 meters deep to ensure that she would remain there undetected. The police subsequently ordered 6 months of preventive detention for the main suspect. That same day, they went to the illegal dumping ground to search for Allison's body. Dozens of volunteers who had been following the case on TV and were devastated by the news of her loss joined the search. On September 27th, a sock and a shoe were found, which Allison's mother, Yendri, identified as belonging to her daughter. Inside the shoe was a nail that the mother instantly recognized as she had painted it in her salon just days before her daughter's disappearance. The following day, a team of rescuers descended into a coffee plantation near the illegal dumping ground. Using safety ropes and specialized mountaineering equipment, they reached a depth of 93 meters where they found vertebrae, ribs, parts of the upper limbs, pelvis, and a femur connected by cartilage. These remains were covered in undergrowth, soil, and moss, some even fused to the ground. 8 meters from the previous site, a piece of fabric was found, belonging to the pants Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared. A second shoe and small bone fragments, which appeared to be part of an arm, were also discovered. They were unable to locate the young woman's skull. It may have rolled out of sight due to its shape. The remains were taken to a laboratory to verify if they match Allison's DNA. Forensic experts found that the body had fractures in the thoracic spine and ribs, which were consistent with the injuries caused by the fall, as described by the suspect. This indicated that they were dealing with a premeditated murder. Although Gendry, Allison's mother, was utterly devastated by the loss of her daughter, she found some solace in knowing that Sanchez Urania would spend the rest of his life in jail. During a press conference, Gendry's lawyers stated that they would do everything possible to ensure the murderer faced the full extent of the law, serving as many years in prison as possible. While they couldn't bring Allison back to life, they could seek justice on her behalf. As they awaited the start of the legal process, Allison's family held a funeral. On March 1st, Sanchez was officially charged with homicide. On April 30th, the criminal court ordered his trial and extended his pretrial detention by another 4 months to prevent any escape attempts. While the case had made significant progress, the most challenging part remained: gathering enough evidence to prove the act was premeditated. Gendry testified that Sanchez Urania had previous encounters with Allison. On one occasion, Allison had gone to pick up her cousins from the bus stop and met the suspect. The man offered them a ride home, which they accepted despite the awkward silence during the trip. Days later, Allison received a message on Facebook from Sanchez Urania asking if she disliked him. Allison replied that she didn't, as they had never spoken, and she didn't know them well enough to form an opinion. The man tersely acknowledged her response. This demonstrated a long-term obsession with Allison, as he even claimed to be deeply in love with her and envious of those she spent time with. However, during the trial, the defendant completely changed his version of events. He claimed innocence and said his previous statements were made under police pressure and torture. Nevertheless, there was no turning back. The body was found where he initially indicated, and DNA evidence in the car directly implicated him. Allison's family provided their testimony in a separate room, as they did not want to face the attacker. Despite this, Sanchez Urania continued to plead innocent. On the morning of August 18, 2021, he was officially sentenced to 18 years in prison for simple homicide. He was acquitted of the abuse charge due to the state in which Allison's body was found, making it impossible to prove. The family was dissatisfied with the sentence, calling for up to 35 years in prison, which is customary in such cases. The verdict was later annulled by the Criminal Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice, and the case was reopened to determine if the crime involved premeditation. In November 2021, the appeals court rejected the family's claims and upheld the original sentence. As of today, the case remains open and Allison's family is pushing for the crime to be reclassified as aggravated homicide and for a review of the sentence. Gendry, Allison's mother, has not only had to cope with the horrific loss of her daughter, but also with cyberbullying. Dozens of people found her Facebook profile and posted messages on her wall, blaming her for Allison's death because she had allowed her daughter to walk alone at night. Local residents came forward in various meetings to say that it's entirely normal for young people in the region to walk long distances from bus stops to their homes. Allison's boyfriend has given several interviews, expressing his outrage over what happened. He mentioned that Allison had many dreams and goals, which Sanchez Urania took away from her. Despite this, he felt grateful for the 1 year and 10 months he had spent with her, stating that she will always be his angel and the best life partner he could have ever had. Although the investigation has technically closed, several questions remain. The family's lawyer has pointed out that it is quite strange for Sanchez Urania to have moved Allison's body to the bottom of a landfill without any help. There is also the mystery of who the men were who had been pursuing Allison on the day of her disappearance, which prompted her to get into the car of her former neighbor. After an audio message that Allison sent her boyfriend went viral, the public has one burning question. Did these two men have anything to do with Sanchez Urania's sinister plan? And if not, why were they following a young woman late at night? The trial concluded too quickly, leaving the family dissatisfied with the sentence. They hope that, in the future, such cases will receive the necessary attention so that all those involved face the appropriate penalties. As you begin to explore the Leslie Palacio case, it is impossible not to feel bewildered and disappointed that justice has not yet been served. The killer remains at large, even though the police have all the evidence and his identity is known to them. Today's story underscores the difficulty of investigating crimes when suspects find themselves outside the jurisdiction and victims can only hope that the perpetrators will be found and brought to justice. The morning of the 29th brought anxiety to the home of Rosalia Palacio, mother of 5 lovely daughters. Her eldest daughter Kayla came down to the kitchen and reported that the bed in Leslie's room was untouched. Her belongings were gone, and she clearly hadn't spent the night at home. One of the sisters joked that it must have been a pretty fun night at the club, and Leslie had probably stayed the night at Eric's. In fact, everyone became alarmed since Leslie had never done this before. Over breakfast, Kayla kept glancing at her phone, expecting a waking Leslie to be about to text. Time passed, but still no word from Leslie. By noon, it stopped seeming normal. By late afternoon, Rosalia decided to go to Eric's house on her own and find out where her daughter had disappeared to. When the Palacio family members drove up to the house, they saw Eric's mother and his sister actively removing pieces of furniture and miscellaneous items from the house. Obviously, taking furniture out of the house is quite normal, but the situation itself and Mrs. Ibarra's crying face caused a very strange feeling for Rosalia. Something was not right here. When asked where Leslie was and why Eric's phone was unavailable, Eric's mother and sister pretended that they didn't even know that the couple had spent the evening together. Rosalia once again clarified whether Leslie had slept over at their house that night, because she knew from her daughter's messages that she was going to Eric's house. After receiving a negative response, Leslie's family realized the seriousness of what was happening. Fears became reality, and the family immediately took action. The older sister, realizing that Leslie could not have disappeared so easily, began calling local hospitals and searching the internet for reports of accidents in the last 24 hours. However, the search was unsuccessful, as were attempts to contact Eric. He had either turned off his phone or the phone with deed, as Kayla couldn't even hear the voicemail. Rosalia had no choice but to call the police. The next day, August 30th, Leslie was officially reported missing. The move was the first in an intense fight for justice. Leslie Palacio was born on May 5, 1998, in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. Her short but full life was full of love and caring for her family. Always open and friendly girl became a source of joy in any company, as she valued everyone she met in her life and was reciprocated. Leslie dreamed of connecting her life with medicine. After graduating from high school, she entered the Las Vegas Medical College. In 2020, she was already confidently moving towards her dream of becoming a phlebotomist and worked part-time as a lab technician. Combining theoretical knowledge with practical skills, Leslie proved herself to be a talented student. Her academic achievements were admirable. She was able to easily assimilate new material and always strive to deepen her knowledge. That is why the girl decided to work part-time as a laboratory assistant. Unexpectedly, Leslie realized that she had found her calling and soon became an integral part of the team. Colleagues considered the student not only a responsible and professional lab technician, but also a warm, responsive person. The girl's duties included conducting various analyses and tests. But for Leslie, this work was much more than just a fulfillment of duties. She saw her calling in the ability to make the process of taking tests as comfortable as possible for patients. Her caring and patience created an atmosphere of trust, and even those who were apprehensive about the procedure felt at ease in her presence. When the youngest of the nurses asked if Leslie was afraid of getting her hands pierced all the time, she laughingly replied that she now had a super ability to poke people. The young optimist's vitality was evident in her every action. By all accounts, Leslie had the unique potential to become a sought-after and valuable specialist in the field of medical laboratory diagnostics, and she would have, if not for a dramatic turn of events. Leslie has been used to helping and caring for everyone since childhood. As the second of 5 daughters, she took on the role of mother when Rosalia Palacio worked as a hotel cleaner. Rosalia recalled her daughter kicking her out of the kitchen when she tried to cook dinner after cleaning more than 15 hotel rooms in a shift. "Get some rest," Leslie gently urged her. Wanting to relieve her mother's burden after work, her daughter took it upon herself to prepare dinners and, in her characteristic easygoing manner, found cooking to be a source of inspiration. From then on, she always made sure her family members were very well fed. And even if she was away and couldn't make the family dinner herself, she always called home to make sure everyone had eaten. For Leslie, family came first, and she easily inspired her sisters with her energy and ideas. For example, even during the pandemic, Leslie didn't let sports disappear by organizing workouts in the backyard of the house. She touted her mother various exercises, and with her sisters, she danced daily in front of the mirror to music. Her love of experimenting with hair color and image turned it into a joint business plan with her older sister to open a boutique. The sisters began designing and sewing dresses at home in their own unique style. When the coronavirus pandemic happened, then Rosalia was laid off due to downsizing. Leslie suggested her mother start her own small cleaning company and assured her that she would definitely help her with the cleanings in her free time from work and school. "Mom will be fine soon. You'll see," she assured Rosalia. At a family council, they came up with a name for the company, the Palacio Cleaning Service. At the time Leslie disappeared, her dreams were just beginning to be realized. Their family firm had landed its first contract. But on August 29, 2020, all of the Palacio family's plans and dreams came crashing down. At the end of August 2020, Leslie completed the lab assistant program and the family firm also received a large order. The girl decided it was time to take a break from the stresses and worries and enjoy an evening of dancing and fun. Especially the restrictions due to the pandemic were gradually being lifted and Las Vegas began to come alive. Unfortunately, none of the friends wanted to keep Leslie company. Although people were beginning to let go of their fears and return to their normal lives, they still felt nervous and anxious at the prospect of being in a closed space with lots of people. Leslie didn't give up hope of convincing someone to have fun and posted a post on Instagram expressing her desire to spend the evening somewhere. Unexpectedly, she received a message from Eric Rangel Ibarra. Leslie and Eric's parents had been attending the same church for 14 years and occasionally socialized. So the children had known each other since childhood but had never interacted closely. Leslie knew what Eric liked, her attention, but Leslie never reciprocated. She was polite to him, however. On any other day, Leslie would have declined Eric's desire to keep her company, but not this time. She was eager to dilute her ordinary life with a fun evening. The whole day passed in anticipation and anticipation. And when none of Leslie's friends wanted to keep her company, she accepted Eric's polite and warm offer to reminisce about Las Vegas nightlife. Sharing a night out with Eric seemed like a better choice than going nowhere at all. Expecting a fun adventure, Leslie had no idea what horrible events awaited her, but she probably had a premonition of something, trying to rationalize to herself that there was no cause for concern. Anyway, Leslie agreed with her sister that she would send her regular messages, telling her exactly where she was. She also told Kayla in great detail where she was going and with whom and what places she might end up in. After a while, the older sister received a strange message. "Can you believe Eric is totally not going to drink this evening? We're at a party, but it looks like I'm going to have to party alone." Afterward, the sisters exchanged joking messages on the topic of healthy living. The first place Eric and Leslie went to was the casino at the Longhorn Hotel. Police officers would later see on surveillance footage of the couple getting out of a white Ford F-250 owned by Eric at 0:31 a.m. on Ayug 29 and entering the casino, then leaving a short time later at 1:56 a.m. The couple would then leave the casino. Leslie kept in contact with her sister, telling her what was going on. At 4:40 a.m., Leslie sent her sister another strange message. "I need to talk to you about something shitty." Kayla asked what happened and, according to her, a text box popped up as if Leslie had started to reply, but no answer ever came. That text message was the last of the girl's life. The morning of the 29th came. Leslie still hadn't returned home. The more time passed, the more concerned the Palacio family members became. The certainty that Leslie had stayed the night at Eric's house was replaced by confusion, and the family went to a familiar house where they found a strange scene. Mrs. Ibarra and her daughter were taking out furniture, pretending that they had heard for the first time that Leslie and Eric had spent the evening together. In fact, Leslie's family arrived at Eric's house just in time. If they had arrived a few hours later, the investigation would have been significantly delayed. The police found traces of blood in the house, a mess in the bedroom, which suggests that Eric's mother and his sister spent the whole day, strangely enough, not to clean up the traces of the crime, but to pack things down to the pieces of furniture. The family was clearly not going on a picnic, but planning a long-term and thorough absence. Most likely, they had arranged to reunite with Eric and his father, Jose, in Mexico, where the two had traveled in order to escape justice. Upon seeing the Palacio family, Mrs. Ibarra probably realized that the chance to leave was gone, leaving evidence in the house that no one would take the time to clean up. Panicked, mother and daughter began to simply deny knowing about Leslie and Eric's evening together. It was this behavior that led to the suspicion that something irreparable had happened. Fortunately, the Las Vegas police took immediate action and sent out a billing inquiry intending to track Leslie's movements since the previous night. But unfortunately, it takes some time to get that data, while the Palacios couldn't sit back and wait. The family started a campaign to spread the word about Leslie's disappearance. People responded and began actively sharing the information on social media. No one expected that there would be so many people who cared. Eric's mom especially didn't expect it. Detectives kept asking more and more questions. And on August 31st, Mrs. Ibarra went to the police station and filed a missing persons report for her husband and son. Mrs. Ibarra told police that her son, Eric, left home late in the evening on August 28th. And when he returned the next morning, he was acting strangely. She saw him walk out the door and never returned. The police noticed a strange circumstance. Not only was Leslie missing, but Eric was also missing, as well as his father. Based on this, an investigation into the triple disappearance began. With the Las Vegas police involved, detectives turned to the residents of the neighborhood with the hope of finding surveillance cameras that recorded something important. Luck smiled. It was discovered that just across the street from Jose Ibarra's home, there were surveillance cameras. In addition to the CCTV footage, police obtained billing data that allowed them to track Leslie's movements in the early morning hours of the 29th. Detectives found that the couple went to the casino and afterward to a grill bar, which they reached around 2:15 a.m. accidentally or not. Leslie's cell phone was left at the bar, and the records show that Leslie left the establishment around 5:50 a.m., which is quite early in the morning. At 6:05 a.m., neighborhood cameras captured Eric's car pulling up to the family home. The nature of his assistance to Leslie in getting out of the car and on the way to the house clearly indicated that the girl was heavily intoxicated. At 7:25 a.m., and his father, Jose, are seen carrying Leslie's body out of the house, wrapped in a sheet and placing it in the trunk of the car. Eric then drives away while Jose hoses down the driveway to their house. These actions clearly indicated that Eric and Jose were not missing, but were fugitives from justice. After police saw the footage, a search warrant was obtained for Ibarra's home. As a result, detectives uncovered a lot of additional evidence showing that Leslie had not left the house voluntarily. The house had been cleaned with cleaning products in an unsuccessful attempt. Latex gloves and trash bags were also found. But the most important piece of evidence was the discovery in Eric's room. Traces of blood were found on the floor and on Eric's bed, an obvious sign of assault. And without DNA testing, it was clear to investigators that the blood belonged to Leslie. From that point on, Leslie Palacio was no longer missing, and investigators focused their efforts on finding her body. Eric and Jose were reported missing. As investigators searched diligently for suspects, the shaken Palacio family made efforts as well. Rosalia asked members of the church community to help search for her daughter's body as search volunteers. Flyers and posters with Leslie's photo and images of Eric and Jose appeared on social media, newspapers, and street poles. The Palacio family is asking the public to intervene and help them find these two men involved in the girl's death, was the message on each flyer. The first major breakthrough in the investigation came when a license plate reader spotted Eric's car just 6 miles from his home around 10 a.m. Agater, 29. He was heading back to his home just 4 hours after Leslie's alleged murder. The information uncovered made investigators realize that the location where Eric may have hidden the body was within a 4-hour drive of his home on the Nevada-Arizona border, or the Charleston Peak side, which is a huge area. So detectives were desperate for any additional information that could help them determine a more precise location. Once again, luck smiled on them when footage was recorded at a gas station 40 miles north of Las Vegas, showing Eric's car pulling off the highway toward the Valley of Fire National Park. The car backed up 20 minutes later with muddy tires. The find narrowed the search and pointed to the possible location of the body, within 20 miles of the gas station. The mud on the tires suggested that Eric had driven off the road at some point. Detectives began searching the area. Police and volunteers combed through hundreds of acres of land. And on September 9, during a second search, they found Leslie Palacio's body hidden near a bush. News outlets immediately spread the word. The body of 22-year-old Leslie Palacio has been found near the Valley of Fire, 11 days after she disappeared. A reporter joined the report, providing additional details about the prime suspect, 25-year-old Eric Rangel Ibarra. The Valley of Fire where the body was found is known for its hot climate, which led to rapid decomposition of the remains, and forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of death. Locals reacted to Leslie's death with horror and fear. Some became afraid to go outside because of the constant thoughts of the uncaught criminals involved in the murder. The day after the body was discovered, September 10th, many friends, relatives, neighbors, and just random people in the area gathered to honor Leslie's memory. People took candles that were used for the nightly vigil and placed them in front of the girl's house. They also said they wanted the man responsible for her death to pay for what he did. The fight for justice was not even close to being over at this point. The next major breakthrough came when Eric's car flashed in Moreno Valley, California. Police eventually contacted Eric's cousin, and he reported that he had driven Jose and his son to San Isidro, where he believed they planned to cross the border into Mexico. The Las Vegas Police Department requested assistance from the FBI because it was not possible for them to resolve the jurisdictional issue on their own. The investigation slowed down. Then, on January 19, 2021, for months after the discovery of the girl's remains, Eric's father, Jose, turned himself in at the border. Everyone was greatly relieved that at least one fugitive was now in custody. The man was quickly extradited back to Clark County and charged with destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. During interrogations, Jose tried to minimize his involvement in the crime, explaining the story of the trip to Mexico by his son's strange behavior on the morning of August 29th. However, investigators showing surveillance video footage debunked his false claims. The footage clearly showed him helping carry Leslie's body out of the house and washing the driveway. Faced with the evidence, Jose changed his testimony. He said he was working in the garage when Eric brought Leslie's body wrapped in a sheet into the garage. According to Jose, he panicked and helped his son load the body into the truck, assuming that Leslie had died of an overdose of illegal drugs because he saw no visible injuries on the body. Court documents indicate that Jose initially told police that, according to Eric, Leslie died of an overdose of illegal drugs. Jose also explained that Eric immediately talked about wanting to end his life, blamed himself, and so he decided that the best thing to do for his son was to take him to Mexico. When investigators asked Jose for Eric's current whereabouts, he explained that as soon as the two of them entered Mexico and boarded the bus was searched by Mexican authorities. He and his son got scared and decided to split up, thinking that apart, it would be harder for the authorities to find them. For this reason, he would love to help the investigation, but has absolutely no idea where his son might be. On June 18, 2021, Jose formally pleaded guilty to destruction of evidence and accessory to murder. Despite the horrific characteristics of his crimes, Jose Ibarra was sentenced to only 2 years in the Clark County Detention Center. causing shock and dismay in the community. The Palacio family was shocked and outraged by Jose's lenient sentence, which they felt was unjust. During the pandemonium, Jose Ibarra joined the court proceedings virtually, while Leslie's family and friends attended in person. They urged the judge to impose a harsher sentence, arguing that 2 years was not enough for an accessory to murder who helped dispose of the body and hid the perpetrator. Jose Ibarra pleaded guilty and tried to apologize to Palacio's family, saying his love for his son outweighed him. He expressed regret for his actions. However, Leslie's family did not accept his apology and did not consider it sincere. To date, Eric's whereabouts remain unknown, and he continues to live a free life in Mexico. Jose was released on April 28, 2022. Ofelia Markarian, attorney and representative of the Palacio family, commented as follows, and raises questions about fairness in dealing with serious crimes. The Palacio family is determined to fight to change the law in Neiva because they believe that whoever was involved in the murder should receive a longer prison sentence than 2 years. They hope that the perpetrator will be found and prosecuted in the United States, where he will be charged and given the punishment he deserves. Ofelia Markarian is directly reaching out to those who may know of Eric's whereabouts in Mexico. In every media interview, she calls for Palacio's family to be given a small measure of justice. Maria de Jesus Zamudio was born on April 5, 1996 in Mexico City. As the third among 4 sisters, she quickly won over the hearts of all who knew her, affectionately earning the nickname Marichui. Throughout her elementary education, she attended a Catholic school. Her dream was to become a nun to help as many people as possible, aiming above all to distinguish herself from selfish individuals. To achieve her goals, she spent every afternoon with her best friend, organizing plays, dances, and talks for younger children to draw them closer to religion. Her interest didn't stop there. She was an extremely active girl, keen on sports, practicing karate and swimming. However, over time, she discovered her true passion was basketball. As a teenager, Marishvi moved away from religion, but not from her studies. She became a very cultured and diligent young woman, spending her time reading and visiting museums every Sunday. She also had a passion for taking photographs of her cat. Although she enjoyed going out like any other teenager, she did not do it often, preferring to spend time with her family. Her passion for study paid off, and she was admitted to the Petroleum Engineering program at the National Polytechnic Institute. Out of 822 applicants, she was one of the 176 women who got in. Initially, Marisu thought she couldn't attend because it was a costly institution, but her record of excellent grades earned her a full scholarship. Despite having her studies secured, the young woman wanted to be economically independent and got a formal job at a cinema chain in Mexico City. There, she won the affection of both her colleagues and customers. Even on promotion days, when the cinema was packed, she managed to make those who approached the purchase window smile. Her goal was to save enough money to take her nephews to Disneyland. Meanwhile, she enjoyed celebrating the Day of the Dead with them, her favorite holiday. Every November, she made bags of sweets and went out to distribute them with the little ones. Marichui's kindness was not only reflected in her relationship with her nephews. She remembered all her close ones, visited them whenever they were sad, and helped them with any inconvenience. She was surrounded by people who loved her. She had the best possible relationship with her mother. They texted each other every morning and dreamed of moving together to a house in Playa del Carmen. Marichui had her whole life planned out. After finishing her degree, she would pursue a master's, then work as an engineer, and later form a family as united as her own. In 2016, she achieved one of her goals. She moved into an apartment with another girl from the university. She had adjusted well to student life, joined the basketball team, and made many friends, but things were not as good as they seemed. Marichui began to suffer harassment from a faculty member named Julio Ivan Ruiz, who was in charge of the Introduction to Petroleum Drilling course. He went as far as suggesting through Facebook Messenger that she could pass the course in exchange for sexual favors. The young woman did not accept this. She spent the entire Christmas vacation studying and took the extraordinary period exam. Julio just gave her a hostile look and failed her. The torment didn't end there. She was also harassed by a student named Mario, who sent her messages every day, claiming he was in love with her. Despite Marishui's lack of response, he continued writing, and the messages became increasingly aggressive. Uncomfortable with both situations, Marishui formally requested a change of major, but she never went through with it. On the afternoon of January 15, 2016, Marishui spoke with her mother on the phone, as she did every day, telling her that she would go to a scenic restaurant with some friends, then they would visit a karaoke bar, and she would return home to sleep. At 4 in the morning, Yesenia's phone began to ring. When she answered, she heard an unknown voice, informing her that Marishui had fallen and was admitted to a hospital. Yesenia immediately hung up the phone without asking for explanations. The most important thing at that moment was to see her daughter. She went to the clinic with her ex-husband. Upon arrival, the receptionist informed her that her daughter was not there. They searched every hospital in the region until they finally arrived at the Valbuena hospital. Her name was on the list of the last admitted, but with several spelling mistakes. However, that was not the worst part. What truly shocked Yesenia and her ex-husband was finding out that Marishui had not suffered a simple fall. The doctors told them she had fallen from the window of an apartment, which was on the 5th floor, sustaining a traumatic brain injury, and was in a coma. The situation was strange, but Yesenia preferred to focus first on her daughter's health. Although the young woman had a chance to survive, she needed to undergo several surgeries for the fractures in her femur, legs, and skull, which were extremely costly. Through social media, Yesenia asked all of Marishui's friends to pray for her and organized a fundraiser to cover the high medical expenses. Thanks to Marishui always helping her acquaintances, they did the same for her, allowing her to be transferred to a specialized hospital where she underwent multiple surgeries. But what happened that night? On January 15, 2016, Marishui attended a dinner at a restaurant at 8 in the evening, planning to eat with 3 friends, one of them named Gabriel. However, Gabriel unexpectedly invited the teacher, Julio Ivan, which made the young woman uncomfortable since he was the professor who had harassed her previously. Marishui tried to stay calm, and after dinner, they went to karaoke. When they left, she tried to take a taxi to return to her apartment, but the teacher insisted on driving her in his truck, which Gabriel was driving. Marishui, somewhat frightened, accepted and sat in the back with the 2 men. During the ride, Julio and Gabriel began to touch Marishui, and when she tried to escape by getting out of the truck, they knocked her down and forcefully put her back in. Upon arriving at her apartment, some neighbors saw Gabriel and Julio carrying Marishui up the stairs while she hit and struggled to escape from them. She even knocked on some apartment doors asking for help, but no one helped her. Not even her friends with whom she shared the rent, thinking it might be a robbery. Minutes later, they opened the apartment, and once inside, Gabriel and Julio tried to undress her to abuse her, managing to tear her clothes and break the buttons. The other 2 roommates just watched from afar and decided not to intervene. Marishui continued screaming and asking for help. Seeing that the situation was going nowhere, Julio and Gabriel proceeded to throw her out of the window. A neighbor named Rosa saw Marishui's body fall more than 12 meters while her attackers fled the scene, at which point she called the police. Marishui fought for her life in the hospital for several days, but ultimately, she died. This version was confirmed after a forensic doctor mentioned that the injury mechanics provided key elements, indicating that the young woman did not jump head first into the void but fell feet first because she tried to grab her attackers until the last moment. This was also proven by finding Julio and Gabriel's DNA under Marishui's nails, leading to a 180-degree turn in the case. In 2018, authorities discarded the accident hypothesis and the idea that she took her own life, classifying the incident as manslaughter, with Gabriel and Julio as the main suspects. However, the latter continued teaching at the university as if nothing had happened. Yesenia was dissatisfied, stating that the case should be classified as femicide, and that by not doing so, they were diminishing the importance of the abuse her daughter had suffered before dying. She filed a complaint with the Mexico City Human Rights Commission. Due to the investigation file being poorly compiled, Yesenia also filed numerous complaints with the Mexico City Secretary of Public Security, the Superior Court of Justice of the capital, and the then city prosecutor's office. The Mexico City Human Rights Commission initiated an investigation and determined that evidence had been omitted during the case. There was evidence of police incompetence and a clear lack of interest on the part of the state. In a report, it was established that in the early hours of January 16th, a police officer arrived at the scene and entered the apartment to see where the victim had jumped from, but only glanced around. After the ambulance left, the officer departed without securing the apartment or the area where the victim fell, and without notifying the judicial authority, which could have led to the manipulation of evidence afterward. Additionally, the autopsy performed on Mari Shuey lacked basic requirements, such as listing all the individuals who had contact with the body and examining the intimate area to determine if she had suffered abuse before her death. Yesenia requested a public act in which the government would acknowledge their responsibility for these omissions and announce measures established to prevent their recurrence. This request was completely ignored and the case was shelved again. Both Julio and Gabriel fled and justice seemed far off. Tired of waiting for answers from the government, Yesenia joined the movement called Inay Uniminos and organized dozens of demonstrations not only for her daughter, but also for all women who had been murdered because of their gender. In February 2020, Yesenia attended an event to demand justice for the femicide of a young woman who was killed by her partner after an argument. The demonstration took place outside the building where the crime occurred, where Yesenia gave a speech accusing the Mexican government of not having personnel trained in gender violence. Yesenia's speech went viral and Marishui's case was finally brought back into focus. On September 7, 2020, it was finally classified as femicide and Mexico City authorities made a public apology to Yesenia and the victim's relatives. On January 25, 2022, a new event for Marishui's case took place at the National Polytechnic Institute, where the university joined the apology previously made by the authorities. Although the general director was present, it was the institution's lawyer who extended the apology. Yesenia accepted the apologies, but mentioned that more work was needed to find the murderers, who were still at large. She also remembered how Marishui's dreams were taken away 5 years ago, saying that if her daughter were alive, she would surely be in love, working, and very happy, as she had been throughout her short life. Months later, the National Polytechnic Institute, where Marishui studied, posthumously awarded the petroleum engineering degree to Yesenia. In February 2022, the police confirmed that following intelligence operations, agents located and apprehended Gabriel, the probable perpetrator of Marishui's femicide. Marilyn Martinez was born on September 3, 1995. Her family was middle class. Although money was not a problem, they always strived to improve their economic status to have a better life. Instilled with strong values, Marilyn's main dream was always to study, secure a good job, and achieve everything she desired. However, someone obstructed her path. At just 17 years old, she met Alexander Israel Pinedo, a 30-year-old man almost twice her age. Yet she didn't care. The love was immediate. Unlike others around her, Alexander seemed unattracted to her responsible and ambitious side. Instead, it bothered him and problems soon followed. Alexander frequently displayed intense jealousy whenever Marilyn went out with friends or even her family. He would lose his sanity, and although Marilyn tried to talk about issues, Alexander would violently beat her in a sinister attempt to show who was in charge. Despite the issues, they moved in together when she was still very young to counteract the torment she experienced at home. Marilyn sought things that made her happy. If she couldn't have stability in her relationship, she would at least find it in her career. She was studying and simultaneously began working in an office. She excelled at what she did, was very diligent, and committed herself fully to everything she undertook. Upon turning 18, Marilyn decided she had endured enough, packed her beautiful suitcases, and left. However, within a few hours, she realized she had forgotten some items in their shared home. She returned to collect them and found Alexander completely furious. He struck her on the head and punched her in the groin. Marilyn left the house crying and went to see her mother and sister, who both encouraged her to file a police report. She followed their advice, yet her determination quickly faded. Like a true manipulator, Alexander showed up at her house and convinced her to get back together, promising a fresh start. He vowed to treat her well and give her something she had always wanted: a child. Marilyn withdrew the police complaint and moved back in with Alexander. They had a beautiful wedding where he promised to care for and love her forever. 9 months later, their first and only child was born, and they moved to an apartment in the province of Lima. However, Alexander's promises quickly evaporated. On one occasion, he inflicted severe blows to Marilyn's head in front of their little one, who was just 1 year and 2 months old. The sinister man had no shame in exercising violence in front of his own son. Burdened by the horrible situation with her partner and the extensive care her young son required, Marilyn neglected her physical appearance, devoting all her time to caring for the baby. Her husband had forbidden her from visiting her mother and sister, as well as from having them come over to help. Growing increasingly depressed, Marilyn gained a significant amount of weight, which only added to her frustration. She no longer met her own beauty standards and didn't feel like the perfect girl she wanted to be. Nonetheless, Marilyn was never the type to remain passive when things didn't unfold as she wished. Something had to be done. She decided to initiate a plan to regain her figure, believing that looking good would make her feel good. Her training started to pay off, and Marilyn had an idea. Many women must be going through the same thing as her. If she recorded her routines and talked about her plans for spiritual growth, she could help others in similar situations. TikTok was the perfect platform for her mission, known for its vast array of videos where many users showcased their transformations and encouraged others to do the same. These were short, easy-to-follow recordings. By the time Marilyn turned 29, she had become a well-known influencer. She had nearly 600,000 followers on TikTok, along with 24,000 on Instagram. Everyone loved her, from housewives wanting to emulate her lifestyle to men attracted to her physique. Her content mainly consisted of exercise routines showing her body's progress, as well as health and self-care tips. She also did daily vlogs explaining how to be an entrepreneurial woman. But Marilyn didn't just post videos of herself. She also enjoyed sharing snippets of her personal life. On multiple occasions, she was seen spending time with her husband and son, who was now 8 years old. The videos often featured Marilyn dancing outside her apartment or playing with little pieces of paper, and also depicted humorous couple scenes that greatly differed from their actual dynamic. All her followers supported the relationship as they appeared very happy and united. Having been together for 12 years, they were seen as a role model. Her followers highlighted how Alexander supported her projects, but no one knew what happened behind closed doors. Marilyn's videos of dancing and lip-syncing to songs stirred up intense hatred in Alexander. He felt she made them to attract men, who would fall at her feet in the comments section. Whenever Alexander saw something on Marilyn's social media that he disliked, the violence would reappear and increase day by day. Marilyn's family was deeply concerned for her. On the rare occasions when they saw her, they couldn't help but notice how her husband controlled every move she made, criticized her clothing, and constantly watched her with disapproval. Whenever Marilyn was away for a couple of hours, she would return home to a disastrous jealousy scene. Alexander bombarded her with questions about whom she had been with and why she had been gone for so long. Marilyn reacted to these comments, but in return, she faced physical violence from her husband. She began to think about separation, but feared how it might affect their son. On the other hand, unconcerned about their son's mental health, Alexander started to use him as a spy, asking him to check his mother's phone and report on her social media interactions. The situation escalated to the point where Alexander wanted to know even what she discussed with her family members, fearing they were advising her to leave him. Despite the disastrous family life, they maintained appearances outside the home, presenting themselves as just another family to the neighbors, and continuing to record videos for TikTok. No one outside their close circle suspected anything, until one day Marilyn made a post that changed everything. On January 15th, 2023, Marilyn uploaded a video to her weekly message section, a new feature on her account. In it, she was seen dressed in a suit, then working out and finally happy in a swimming pool. In the background, the song Flowers by Miley Cyrus could be heard, a track that expresses women's autonomy. The video included captions over the images with phrases like, "I can buy myself flowers, write my name in the sand, talk to myself for hours, see the things you don't understand," and it concluded with, "I can love myself better than you ever did." Users took this as a sign that her marriage might have ended. In reality, it was a cry for help. Alexander saw the video on his phone and noticed hundreds of comments encouraging his wife to move forward. He also saw several men who, as always, were enchanted by her beauty and decided he had endured enough. The following day, around 2 in the afternoon, Marilyn was in her room doing her exercise routine, distracted. Alexander grabbed a knife from the kitchen and went to the bedroom they shared. He silently entered and stabbed her in the back, knocking her to the floor. Then he stabbed her 29 more times, ignoring Marilyn's pleas, and finally took her life. After committing the horrendous act, he turned around and realized their son had witnessed everything, entering a total state of shock. He only snapped out of it when he heard the police sirens arriving at their home. The neighbors had heard Marilyn's loud cries for help coming from the house. They were not accustomed to such incidents in their quiet neighborhood and were truly dismayed. They called the police, who arrived quickly at the scene and tried to knock on the door, but no one answered. So they broke into the home looking for signs of life. The first thing they saw was the boy in the hallway in a state of distress. He told them he had locked himself in one of the rooms because he was afraid his father might hurt him. He didn't fully understand what had happened. The officers took the boy to the patrol car to ensure his safety and then continued searching for his parents. Upon reaching the master bedroom, they encountered a horrific scene. Marilyn's lifeless body was on the floor next to her bed, lying in a pool of blood, with multiple wounds to her head, arm, and wrist. The officers didn't even call for a doctor. As there was no hope, they continued to search the house, hoping to find the perpetrator, fearing he might have fled. However, Alexander was in the living room, sitting very calmly, showing no remorse. He confessed to the crime and allowed the officers to handcuff him. As a precaution in case he later regretted his statement, one of the officers took out his cell phone and started recording. Alexander wasn't bothered. He was used to performing for the screens. When asked if he had used the same knife for all the injuries he had inflicted, he answered affirmatively. Before being taken to the patrol car to be transported to the station, he asked the authorities to take care of his son. Alexander was placed in pretrial detention, awaiting the start of the judicial process. He returned to the house where he committed the crime to participate in the reconstruction of the events. This time, he himself prevented being recorded, seeming guilty of having murdered his wife. He even wore the same shirt that had appeared in several of their videos. He detailed Marilyn's last moments of life, admitting he had taken her by surprise so she couldn't defend herself. He mentioned seeing the blood flow. At that moment, he thought about taking his own life, deciding it was his turn. But before he could stab himself, he backed out, describing himself as a coward in his own words. Despite the magnitude of his narrative, the sinister man spoke with total coldness, as if recounting an anecdote. He also did not hesitate to say that his son had witnessed the crime. He reiterated that he was a murderer who had killed his wife and promised to pay whatever was necessary, although he did not seem very remorseful. That same day, local news broadcast the video, which even reached TikTok, the platform where Marilyn had often appeared cheerful and happy. At first, her followers thought it was a distasteful joke, but as hours passed, all Peruvian media outlets spread the news and the collective grief was overwhelming. Social media unified in demanding the maximum penalty for the murderer. The trial began swiftly, with Marilyn's relatives present to give their version of the story. They emphasized that episodes of domestic violence were constant in the relationship. They detailed how Marilyn had been mistreated physically and psychologically by her husband over the 12 long years of their relationship. They even mentioned the complaint she had filed against him in 2012, which she later regretted and withdrew. When Marilyn's sister took the stand, she made a powerful statement. noting that she had had the chance to observe the house after the police had finished their investigation. She pointed out that a part of Marilyn's wardrobe was completely empty, most likely because, considering also the video posted on her TikTok account the day before the murder, she was planning to finally leave her husband. Alexander denied that their relationship had ended, but admitted they had many problems. He spoke about how his partner's thousands of followers tried to woo her through messages, which made him extremely jealous. He admitted that jealousy was the motive for killing Marilyn, as if it were a valid reason. Public prosecutor's office ordered 9 months of preventive detention for Alexander, identifying him as the perpetrator of the murder. It is hoped that a more extensive trial can be held in the future where the maximum penalty is sought. Until then, an entire country will be watching. Social media was filled with messages of solidarity for the terrible event. Hundreds of TikTok users shared videos recounting the story and using the hashtag Justice for Marilyn. For those who followed her on social media, it was a profound shock. But even those who did not know her empathized with her case. The case became so significant that several accounts decided to post videos raising awareness on the issue. These videos encouraged women to report if they suffer from gender violence, warning them never to ignore the slightest sign of abuse and emphasizing that one can never fully know their partners, boyfriends, or lovers. These crimes often occur within the family, by men who claim to love their partners. The goal was to encourage those suffering in their relationships to leave before it's too late. Although her videos were once filled with laughter, they became a sort of sanctuary for her followers. Marilyn's son is under the custody of his maternal grandmother, away from the media spotlight. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.